to the watchers at home. Hello, I am Zack Shiffman of the Dark Sire Creative Nook series on YouTube, and I'm here today with Samuel Marzioli, an author of a recent anthology that just came out called Hollow Skulls and Other Stories, which will be linked in the description. And we are going to be interviewing today. Samuel, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I live in Oregon. I write predominantly horror and dark fantasy, and yeah, that
Okay,
sums me up.
that is sweet. So I will jump right in then. I mentioned the anthology, Hollow Skulls and Other Stories. It's very good. And so I just want to ask, like, how did that whole project come to be?
Um, well, I'd wanted to get a collection together for a while. I just never thought I was ready. But in 2019, I started checking out all the stories I'd had published, and I thought maybe it's time. So I started doing research, seeing who was going to open that year. And at the time, there were supposed to be 4 markets that were available that were going to open to a short story collection submissions. But unfortunately, one of them closed down. One of them never opened, and then one said no. So my only option was Journal Stone, or they were the final possibility I had left was Journal Stone. I submitted them the collection, and in 4 months, they came back to me with a yes. So
Nice. So putting it together, then gathering the stories, that was all not the hard part. The hard part was finding the publisher.
for me, I think what I did is when I first was thinking about putting a collection together, I looked at all my stories. I picked out 20 of my strongest ones, and then I narrowed it down to 13 based on word count. And I thought, oh, this is a pretty good collection of stories. But yeah, so then now you have to get somebody interested in wanting to pay money to have it published. Not, yeah, definitely hard part for me.
Okay. So what about all your stories have at the very least elements of horror to them, if not being straight up horror, dark fiction, because that's what you write. So what about that genre, horror and dark fiction, appeals to you over other subgenres?
I was raised on horror. Growing up, my family would watch horror movies together, and my dad collected horror books, so I would sometimes read his collection. He wasn't very like, oh, you can't read this until you're older. If I was interested, they would let me read it. So pretty early on, I was checking out some Kings, Lovecraft, just various whatever he had. Um, I think also though, like I would go when I was probably even as early as 8 to 10, I would go to the paranormal section of my library and check out books on ghosts and demons and various cryptids. Um, so I think it's been a lifelong fascination with just the strange and unusual. I get excited about writing horror in ways that I don't get excited when writing other genres. I have written them. I've done some sci-fi and straight fantasy, and I've enjoyed them. I like to think they're good. But yeah, I just think my horror is. I think that's what I get most excited about.
Okay, that's cool. I mean, I love horror, obviously, so
Yeah.
I get where you're coming from. So one of your stories, Molto, is inspired by Filipino folklore, correct?
Sure. Yeah.
So, in that case, does Filipino folklore and urban legends does that influence your other works as well, and like works that you are just now creating?
I have tried purposefully to have stories that are based on Filipino culture and Filipino urban legends and folklore. So yeah, in the same collection, I have the story Pug Pug, which is set in fictionalized Manila, Philippines. Um, I also have The Last Great Failing of the Light, which is in the collection. That is very loosely based on pre-colonial Tagalog culture. And then I've written some that didn't make the collection this time. I'm hoping maybe next time they can appear. But Servant of the Aswang features the famous Filipino aswang, which is one of their most notable monsters. And then I had a story in an anthology called Fell Beast and Fair called Everything Mimsy. And that featured, I think, something like a dozen different Filipino fantasy creatures. So yeah, I like to include them. I purposely try to, because I think it's fascinating, and I don't feel like it gets as much attention as maybe it deserves.
Okay. That yeah. So that's interesting. I would love to read more about Filipino folklore and stuff. So definitely. Um so my next question is, your stories are horror, so they are dark, but there is some optimism in them. There's some hope in them, like some light in them, that I've noticed anyway. So what do you think is the importance of that balance between the horrific and the hopeful?
For me, I think it comes about organically. When I start a story, I don't think, okay, this guy's gonna get really screwed over at the end. I just kind of I keep writing it, and as it goes on, sometimes the ending will present itself. Actually, most of the time it does. There have been times when I'm like, oh, that did not work at all, and I will switch it. Like, okay, he protagonist dies. Nope, I have to switch it back. Now he survives, and everything's great. So a lot of that just comes out of the creative process. But I mean, there is a part of it too where I think for me as a reader, when I read authors and they always go morose, I feel like, okay, I know exactly where the story is going, follows the same beats. It's still fun to get there, but for me, I think there's a little bit of extra interest and pleasure out of not knowing if the protagonist survives or if the antagonist wins. So, I mean, it's to some extent, as far as the creative process allows, I will try to change it up.
So you think that a happy ending and a non-happy ending um provides its own sort of suspense in a way?
Yeah, I think it can. I mean, um, I don't know. I feel like you kind of root for the protagonist. You want him or her to survive, and it can be devastating when they don't, and it can be, I don't know, triumphant when they do. So I definitely think it adds a different element, especially in my collection. I did try to balance it out, but for me, I guess it really was mostly just quality. But I did try to make sure I included just a little bit of that element, or the happiness, or even uplifting, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. I hadn't thought of it. That's interesting. So how has your writing style changed over time then?
Um, when I was starting out, I think I probably wrote more casually, like exactly how I would speak. I remember in 2013, I sort of won a critique from the author David Farland for one of a sci-fi story I'd written, and he basically said, you like the story, but the prose needed a lot of work. And I was like, oh, okay. So I mean, that was kind of like the first time I was kind of like catching on. I was like, oh, maybe I do need to improve a bit. But then I was turned on to writers like Laird Barron and Ramsey Campbell. And then I met a writer who was new at the time, named Michael Wehunt, and I did beta reading for his work. And as I was reading their stuff, I just was like, wow, this is really incredible stuff. You can really draw more out of your words if you concentrate. I don't know, if you, I don't know. It was just really well written. And I was like, oh, I do need to improve on that. So from then on, I started studying as much as reading, studying their works, studying my favorite authors' works, and seeing how they describe things on the word level, sentence level, paragraph level. And then I started putting it into practice. Actually, the title story, my collection, Hollow Skulls, came about in that period, though it still needed a few years before I got it where I exactly wanted it. But I think I was on the right path. And I do remember in, I think, 2018, I got another critique from David Farland for a newer story that I had written. And he said that my prose were crisp and beautiful. And I was like, wow, I think, I'm not there yet, but I feel like I'm in the right path. I'm in the right direction.
Yeah, I think you are. I mean, I read a bunch of your stories from Hollowed Skulls, and your prose definitely impressed me throughout all of them.
Thank you. Thank
Like
you.
especially in Molto, I was like, wow. Like I finished that, I was like, wow, nice.
Appreciate it.
So, so on that note, on the note of taking the lead or the advice or the models of other writers, what advice do you have for other writers? Like, for example, if you ever get writer's block, how do you overcome that?
Oh, I guess I'd have two pieces of advice. One is, like I did, study better writers and see what they did, what makes what they did work. I think that was very helpful for me starting out. Um, and also, I guess similarly, when I get stuck, sometimes I'll just read a writer I know is really good, and I'm like, for some reason, just the process of going over his work or her work just kind of sparks something, and it helped me, especially if it's a similar genre. um I mean, those are the things I do.
Okay. So again on that note, so what book, you mentioned a bunch of authors earlier, but what one book, any book, do you recommend to readers?
Oh, always for me, I think my first favorite and still favorite is Peter Straub's Ghost Story. That's, for me, that's a perfect horror novel. Probably one of the few novels I've read multiple times. I always tell people, I said, there's so many good writers and good books out there. I don't find the time to read them more than once. But for Peter Straub's Ghost Story, I will make an exception. I think I read that like 5 times, which for me is a lot.
Peter Straub's Ghost Story. Okay, I'll definitely add that to the list then of the mounting list of books I have to read. But yeah, that's really cool. So we're almost at the end here. So I just want to ask a general question. Like, is there anything else you want to say about your work, like your anthology or future projects that you want to tease or talk about, or anything that you're working on, anything you want to say in general? Now is your time.
Oh, okay. Um, it's not it's not a future project, but in a short amount of time ago, Aurelia Leo released a chapbook of mine called Symphony of the Night. It's, chapbook, so it's short, but it features a cover and 6 interior illustrations by Luke Spooner. It's weird and horror, and I love it, and I think people who like my collection might enjoy it too.
Okay, Simply in the Night chapbook. I love chapbooks, so I'll check that out. And I'll link in the description as well as your anthology and your site. So that's basically all I have. If that's all you guys say,
Sure, yeah, I'm done.
thank you, thank you so much for coming and for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, definitely. So that's more or less it. Like I said, everything will be linked in the description. Watchers, thank you for watching for the Darksiders Creative Nook series. Samuel Marzioli, again, thank you. And that's the interview. Thanks for coming. Bye.
All right. See you.